The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of Courtroom 4B in downtown Chicago. It was 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the ancient heating system groaned and hissed, filling the high-ceilinged room with an uncomfortable warmth that made everyone shift restlessly in their seats. Judge Martinez, a stern woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, adjusted her reading glasses as she entered through the private chamber door. Her black robes swished against the worn carpet, and the sound of her heels clicking against the floor commanded immediate silence. The morning docket was brutal, 12 cases stacked up like dominoes, each one threatening to cascade into the next if timing went wrong. Defense attorneys shuffled through manila folders stuffed with documents. Prosecutors checked their watches nervously. Court reporters flexed their fingers, preparing for hours of rapid typing. The air smelled of old wood polish, stale coffee from the vending machine down the hall, and anxiety. Among the crowd of spectators filling every wooden bench sat Emma, a petite woman of 32 with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her 3-year-old daughter, Lily, close to her chest. They weren't supposed to be there. Emma had received a jury duty summons 3 weeks ago, and despite her explanations about being a single mother, well, effectively single since the incident 6 months ago, the court had her request for postponement. Then, at 6:30 that very morning, her babysitter had texted with a frantic apology. "Family emergency. Can't make it, so sorry." Emma had called everyone. Her mother was out of state visiting Emma's sister. Her best friend was on a business trip. That didn't open until 9, which would make her late to court, an offense that could result in contempt charges. So here she sat, breaking into a cold sweat, with Lily perched on her lap in a purple dress decorated with embroidered butterflies. The little girl's dark hair was pulled into 2 ponytails secured with sparkly hair ties, and her small legs swung back and forth rhythmically, bumping against Emma's knees. "Mama, I'm bored," Lily whispered, though her whisper carried further than Emma would have liked. "Baby, just a little while longer. Please be good," Emma pleaded quietly, pressing a well-worn board book into her daughter's hands. Lily flipped through the pages with diminishing interest, humming a tuneless melody under her breath. The case being heard that morning was no minor affair. A robbery investigation involving Corner Store, a family-owned convenience shop on the South Side, had turned violent 3 weeks prior. The elderly store owner, Mr., had been pistol-whipped during the robbery and suffered a severe concussion. The suspect had fled with $340 from the register and Mr.'s wallet. Security footage was grainy, but police had tracked down a potential suspect based on a distinctive tattoo visible on the perpetrator's forearm, a coiled snake with red eyes. Detective James Monroe was the lead investigator, and he was scheduled to testify about the evidence collected at the scene. Detective Monroe was a veteran of the Chicago Police Department, 23 years on the force, with a reputation for being thorough, professional, and intimidating in the witness box. He never appeared in court without his partner, and everyone knew it. His partner wasn't human. Rex was a 4-year-old German Shepherd, 75 pounds of pure muscle and intelligence, trained in tracking, apprehension, and evidence detection. Rex had been with Monroe since puppyhood, trained at the Police K-9 Academy in suburban Chicago, and had assisted in solving over 40 cases. The dog was legendary within the department. He'd once tracked a kidnapping suspect for 3 miles through dense forest, leading officers directly to a child who'd been missing for 18 hours. As the courtroom deputy, a heavy-set man with a mustache that belonged in a 1970s cop show, stood and bellowed, "All rise." Everyone in the courtroom got to their feet. The rustle of clothing and creaking of old benches filled the room. Emma struggled to hold Lily while standing, and the little girl squirmed, wanting to be put down. "Not now, Lily. Stand still," Emma whispered urgently. Judge Martinez took her seat on the elevated bench, surveying the room with the practiced eye of someone who'd presided over thousands of cases. She nodded to the deputy. "Please be seated." Everyone sat with a collective sigh of relief. Emma finally put Lily down on the bench beside her, keeping a firm hand on the child's shoulder. Case number 2024 CR 8756, People vs. Michael. Is the state ready to proceed? Judge Martinez's voice carried authority that made even seasoned attorneys straighten their spines. "Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Detective James Monroe to the stand." That's when the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a theatrical creak that turned every head. Detective Monroe entered, and he was an imposing figure, 6'3", broad-shouldered with close-cropped graying hair and a jaw that looked like it could crack walnuts. His dark suit was immaculate, his tie perfectly knotted, and his badge gleamed on his belt. But it wasn't Monroe that captured everyone's attention. Walking beside him, connected by a short leather lead, was Rex. The German Shepherd moved with fluid grace, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his glossy black and tan coat. His ears stood at attention, rotating slightly as he processed every sound in the room. His dark, intelligent eyes scanned the faces of spectators with professional alertness, assessing for threats the way he'd been trained. The dog's presence commanded respect. Even the court stenographer, who'd seen everything in her 15 years on the job, sat up a little. Detective Monroe's boots echoed against the marble floor as he walked down the center aisle toward the witness stand. Rex matched his pace perfectly, never pulling on the lead, never distracted. They were a unit, synchronized through years of partnership and mutual trust. Lily had been humming and flipping through her book, only half aware of her surroundings. But the moment Rex entered, something changed. Emma felt it before she saw it. Her daughter's small body went completely rigid on the bench beside her. The humming stopped. The book slipped from Lily's hands and fell to the floor with a soft thud. Emma glanced down at her daughter and felt a spike of concern. Lily's face had gone pale. Her eyes were enormous, fixed on the German Shepherd with an intensity that seemed impossible for a 3-year-old. Her breathing quickened, coming in short, sharp gasps. Her small hands clenched into fists, and Emma saw her daughter's whole body begin to tremble. "Lily, baby, what's wrong?" Emma whispered, alarmed. But Lily didn't respond. She was locked in, frozen, staring at Rex like she'd seen a ghost. Detective Monroe reached the witness stand and was about to command Rex to sit when it happened. Lily's small arm shot out like a missile, her finger pointing directly at the German Shepherd. And then she screamed, not a tantrum scream, not a whiny cry, but a sound of pure, primal terror that cut through the formal silence of the courtroom like a knife through butter. "That doggy!" The words exploded from her tiny lungs with such force that they seemed to physically impact everyone in the room. The judge jerked backward. The defense attorney dropped his pen. The court reporter's fingers froze above her keyboard, and every single person in that packed courtroom turned to stare at the small child standing on a bench in the third row, her finger trembling as it pointed at the police dog. Emma's face burned crimson, flooding with humiliation and panic. This was her worst nightmare realized. She'd been terrified Lily would disrupt the proceedings, and now her daughter was screaming and pointing, making a scene that would probably get them both thrown out, or worse, held in contempt. "Lily, no, stop it. I'm so sorry." Emma grabbed for her daughter, trying to cover her mouth, whispering frantic apologies to the people sitting around them. But Lily fought against her mother's grip with surprising strength. Her eyes never left Rex, and the terror in them was real, visceral, impossible to fake. Judge Martinez raised her gavel, her face stern. The bang of wood on wood should have restored order, but before she could speak, Emma was already gathering Lily into her arms, preparing to flee the courtroom in shame. She'd deal with the consequences later. Right now, she just needed to get her hysterical daughter out of. "Wait." The single word from Judge Martinez stopped Emma in her tracks. The judge was leaning forward now, her stern expression replaced by something else. Curiosity, concern, Emma couldn't quite read it. "Mrs. Is it?" The judge was reading from her jury list. "Why, yes, Your Honor, I'm so sorry. She's never done anything like this. I'll take her out right now. I apologize to the court." "Hold on." Judge Martinez raised her hand. She'd been on the bench for 26 years. She'd seen every kind of courtroom disruption imaginable, defendants trying to escape, witnesses having panic attacks, attorneys fainting from heat exhaustion. But something about this child's reaction struck her as different. This wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't boredom or misbehavior. This was fear. And Judge Martinez had learned long ago to trust her instincts. She looked at the trembling little girl in the purple butterfly dress, still staring at the police dog with those enormous, terrified eyes, and made a decision that would change everything. The silence that followed Judge Martinez's command to wait was deafening. Emma stood frozen in the aisle, her daughter clutched against her chest, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes boring into her back. Her heart hammered so hard she could hear it pulsing in her ears. Lily continued to tremble in her arms, small fingers digging into Emma's blazer with desperate intensity. Detective James Monroe stood motionless at the witness stand, his hand instinctively resting on Rex's head in a calming gesture. The German Shepherd had sensed the disturbance and was alert but calm, his training keeping him perfectly still despite the commotion. His ears swiveled toward the child, processing the sound of her distress with the analytical precision of a seasoned working dog. "Mrs., please sit back down," Judge Martinez said, her tone softer now but still commanding. "Bailiff, hold the witness for a moment." The courtroom deputy, Officer Frank, who'd been moving toward Emma to escort her out, stopped mid-stride and returned to his position near the judge's bench. The prosecutor, Assistant State's Attorney, stood at her table looking confused and slightly irritated at the interruption to her carefully planned examination. The defense attorney, a young public defender named, seized the moment to scribble notes, probably already thinking about how to use this disruption to his advantage. Emma reluctantly returned to her seat, perching on the edge of the bench as if ready to bolt at any second. She tried to turn Lily away from the dog, but her daughter twisted in her arms with surprising strength, her eyes still locked on Rex like he was the only thing in the universe that mattered. "Lily, please, baby, calm down," Emma whispered desperately, rocking her daughter gently. "It's just a dog. He's a nice police dog. He won't hurt you." But Lily wasn't listening. Her small chest heaved with rapid breaths, and tears began streaming down her flushed cheeks. Her pointing finger never wavered, even as Emma tried to gently push her arm down. The little girl was locked in some kind of trance, and it terrified Emma in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Judge Martinez removed her reading glasses and studied the child with the intense focus of someone solving a complex puzzle. In her 26 years on the bench, Martinez had developed an almost supernatural ability to read people. She could spot a lying witness from the subtle shift of their eyes. She could detect when an attorney was bluffing from the way they shuffled papers. And right now, every instinct she possessed was screaming that this child's reaction meant something important. "Detective Monroe," the judge said, "please move yourself and your K-9 partner to the back of the courtroom for a moment." Monroe didn't question the unusual request. "Yes, Your Honor." He gave Rex a subtle hand signal, and the German Shepherd immediately turned and walked beside his handler toward the rear of the courtroom, their movements perfectly synchronized. As they moved away, Emma felt Lily's body relax slightly in her arms, though the trembling didn't stop entirely. The prosecutor stepped forward, clearly frustrated. "Your Honor, I object to this delay. We have a witness prepared to testify and this disruption." "Your objection is noted, Ms. Overruled." Judge Martinez's voice carried an edge that made the prosecutor close her mouth and sit back down. "Now, Mrs., how old is your daughter?" Emma's throat felt like sandpaper. "She's 3, Your Honor, 3.5 actually. She just turned 3 in April." "And what's her name?" "Lily." Does Lily have any history of being afraid of dogs? Emma shook her head, confusion mixing with her embarrassment. No, Your Honor. Actually, she loves dogs. She's always asking when we can get a puppy. We had to walk past a pet store last week and she cried because I wouldn't let her go in and play with the puppies in the window. This isn't normal for her at all. Judge Martinez leaned forward, resting her elbows on the bench. Has she ever had a negative experience with a police dog specifically, or a German shepherd? Not that I know of, Emma said, but even as the words left her mouth, doubt crept in. Had there been some incident she'd forgotten or dismissed? Lily had been having nightmares lately, waking up crying, but Emma had attributed that to the trauma of what happened to David. She'd never connected it to dogs. Your Honor, the defense attorney interjected, standing up with a calculated expression. While I sympathize with the child's apparent distress, I must question the relevance of this line of inquiry to the case at hand. My client is facing serious charges and— Mister, I'm going to stop you right there, Judge Martinez said, her voice taking on a steely quality. Something unusual is happening in my courtroom, and I intend to understand what it is before we proceed. You will sit down and wait patiently, or you will find yourself explaining to your client why I held you in contempt. Am I clear? Sat down so fast his chair squeaked. Crystal clear, Your Honor. The judge turned her attention back to Emma and Lily. The little girl had quieted somewhat, but tears still rolled down her cheeks, and her breathing remained rapid and shallow. Emma wiped her daughter's face with a tissue from her purse, trying to soothe her with soft words and gentle touches. Mrs., I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Has your family been involved in any incident with law enforcement in the past year? Anything at all, even something that seemed minor? Emma's blood ran cold. The question hit her like a physical blow, and suddenly memories came flooding back, memories she'd tried so hard to suppress, to move past, to forget for the sake of survival and sanity. 6 months ago, Lincoln Park, a beautiful Saturday afternoon that turned into a nightmare. Your Honor, Emma's voice cracked and she had to clear her throat before continuing. My husband was assaulted 6 months ago, in Lincoln Park. It was a robbery. He was jogging and someone attacked him from behind. He was hit in the head with something, they never found what, and he was unconscious when the paramedics arrived. The courtroom's energy shifted palpably. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a moment, looking up with sudden interest. Detective Monroe, still standing at the back of the room with Rex, straightened perceptibly. Go on, Judge Martinez prompted gently. David, my husband, he survived, but he was in the hospital for 2 weeks. He had a severe concussion, memory problems. He still gets headaches. The police investigated, but they never found who did it. The case went cold after about a month. They said without witnesses or surveillance footage, there wasn't much they could do. Emma's voice grew bitter at the end. She'd been so angry at the police, at the system, at the world for failing to protect her family. And was your daughter with you at the park that day? Emma's heart stopped. She looked down at Lily, who had finally stopped crying but was still staring toward the back of the courtroom where Rex waited with his handler. Emma's mind raced backward through time, reconstructing that terrible day moment by moment. They'd gone to the park as a family. It was supposed to be a fun afternoon, a picnic, playing on the swings, David jogging while Emma watched Lily play in the sandbox. Emma had been on her phone, scrolling through social media, only half watching her daughter. David had waved goodbye before starting his run around the park's perimeter trail. Emma had waved back, not knowing it would be the last normal moment they'd share for months. And then Lily had started crying. Emma had looked up from her phone, annoyed at first, thinking her daughter was just being fussy. But Lily had been pointing toward the trail, saying something about Daddy falling down. Emma hadn't understood at first. She'd thought Lily was making up stories, the way 3-year-olds do. But then she'd seen the crowd gathering, heard the sirens. Oh my God, Emma whispered, her face draining of all color. She was there. She was in the sandbox. She could see that section of the trail from where she was playing. I thought she was too far away to see anything. I thought she was just confused because of all the commotion afterward. Judge Martinez's expression remained carefully neutral, but her eyes had sharpened with intense focus. And did police respond to the scene? Yes, of course. Ambulances, police cars, they were there within minutes. And would K-9 units have been part of that response? Emma's hands began shaking so violently that she nearly dropped her purse. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture she'd been too traumatized and distracted to see before. The nightmares Lily had been having, they weren't just about Daddy being hurt. The way she'd started acting nervous around strangers, her sudden fear of going back to that park. I don't know, maybe. There were so many officers. I was so focused on David, on getting to the hospital. Lily was with my mother by then. I didn't. Emma's voice broke. I didn't think to ask her what she'd seen. She was only 3. How could she possibly understand or remember? But children remember, Judge Martinez thought. Sometimes they remember everything. The judge looked toward the back of the courtroom where Detective Monroe stood waiting. Detective, what date was David's assault? Monroe pulled out his phone, quickly accessing police databases. His face changed as he read. April 18th, Your Honor. Lincoln Park, approximately 2:30 p.m. He stopped, his expression shifting to one of recognition and something that might have been shock. I responded to that call. Rex and I were in the area when it came through. We were among the first responders. The courtroom erupted. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Spectators began talking all at once, their voices rising in waves of shock and speculation. The defense attorney jumped to his feet, shouting objections about relevance and procedure. The prosecutor stood frozen at her table, her carefully prepared case suddenly derailed by something she never could have anticipated. The court reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard, struggling to capture every word of the unprecedented scene unfolding before her. Judge Martinez's gavel came down hard, once, twice, 3 times, each bang echoing like a gunshot through the high-ceilinged room. Order! I will have order in this courtroom. Her voice cut through the noise with the authority of someone who had commanded respect for over 2 decades. Gradually, the voices quieted, but the electric tension in the air remained, crackling like static before a lightning strike. Emma sat motionless on the hard wooden bench, her world tilting on its axis. Everything she thought she knew about that terrible day was being reconstructed in real time. She looked down at Lily, really looked at her, and saw her daughter with new eyes. This wasn't just a toddler having a random meltdown. This was a witness to her own father's brutal assault, carrying trauma that no one had recognized because everyone had assumed she was too young to understand, too young to remember. Mrs. Judge Martinez's voice was gentler now, almost maternal. I need you to stay calm. What we're discovering here could be extremely important. Do you understand? Emma nodded numbly, unable to form words. Her throat had closed up completely, and tears were streaming down her face. She held Lily closer, feeling the rapid beating of her daughter's small heart against her own chest. Detective Monroe had moved away from the back wall and was walking slowly down the center aisle, Rex still at his side. But this time, his approach was different, careful, measured, as if he were approaching a skittish animal or a volatile crime scene. His mind was racing through protocols and procedures, trying to figure out how to handle what was rapidly becoming the most unusual situation of his entire career. Your Honor, Monroe said, his deep voice steady despite the extraordinary circumstances. With your permission, I'd like to try something. Judge Martinez studied him for a long moment, weighing the legal implications against the potential breakthrough. This wasn't standard procedure. Hell, there probably wasn't any procedure for what was happening, but sometimes justice required thinking outside the lines drawn in law books. Proceed, detective, but carefully. Monroe nodded and gave Rex a hand signal. The German Shepherd immediately sat, his posture relaxed but alert. Then Monroe walked forward alone, leaving his partner about 10 feet away from Emma and Lily. He crouched down in the aisle, bringing himself to eye level with the frightened child. "Hi, Lily," he said softly, his voice transformed from the authoritative officer tone to something warm and kind. "My name is Detective Monroe. That's my friend Rex back there. He's a really good dog. He helps me find people who are lost and catch bad guys. Do you remember seeing Rex before?" Lily's eyes darted between Monroe and the German Shepherd. Her little body was still trembling, but something in the detective's gentle demeanor seemed to reach through her fear. She nodded slightly, a tiny movement that sent shockwaves through everyone watching. Emma gasped, "Lily, baby, do you remember the park when Daddy got hurt?" The mention of her father seemed to unlock something in Lily. Her small face crumpled and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. But this time, instead of screaming, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence of the courtroom, every word carried like thunder. "Daddy fell down. The bad man hurt Daddy." Emma's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. The courtroom remained frozen, everyone afraid that any sound or movement might shatter this fragile moment of truth emerging from a 3-year-old's memory. Detective Monroe felt his pulse quickening. He'd interviewed hundreds of witnesses over his career, but never anyone this young, and never under circumstances like these. He glanced back at Judge Martinez, who gave him a subtle nod to continue. "Lily, you're being very brave," Monroe said, his voice still soft and encouraging. "Can you tell me what the bad man looked like?" Lily shook her head, her ponytail swishing back and forth. "Didn't see his face. He was behind Daddy, wearing dark clothes like a hood." She touched the back of her own head, demonstrating how the attacker had been positioned. Emma's eyes widened. The police had theorized that the attacker struck from behind based on David's injuries, but they'd never had confirmation. Here was that confirmation, coming from the smallest witness imaginable who'd been dismissed and overlooked because of her age. "That's very helpful, Lily. You're doing great," Monroe continued, his heart pounding. "Now I need to ask you something important. Can you look at Rex again? I know he scares you, but I need you to be brave for just a minute." Lily turned her tear-stained face toward the German Shepherd. Rex remained sitting perfectly still, his tongue hanging out slightly, looking for all the world like a friendly pet rather than a trained police K9. But to Lily, he clearly represented something else, something tied to the worst moment of her young life. "When you saw Rex that day at the park," Monroe asked carefully, "what was he doing?" Lily's small voice quavered, but she answered, He was sniffing, looking around, looking for—" She paused, struggling to find the words. Her limited 3-year-old vocabulary couldn't quite express what she'd witnessed, but everyone in the courtroom was hanging on every syllable. And then Lily did something no one expected. She squirmed out of her mother's grip. Emma was too stunned to hold on and stood up on the bench. Her small frame was rigid with emotion, her face flushed red, and her hands clenched into tiny fists. She pointed directly at Rex with a trembling arm, and when she spoke, her voice rose from a whisper to something louder, clearer, filled with the absolute certainty that only a child possesses. He was looking for the bad man. The words hung in the air like a revelation, and then Lily's small voice cracked as she added 2 more words. 2 words that would change everything. 2 words so simple yet so devastating that they seemed to suck all oxygen from the room. Bad man. Judge Martinez's gavel, raised to maintain order, froze midair. The prosecutor's pen clattered from her nerveless fingers and rolled across the table, falling to the floor with a small clatter that sounded deafening in the absolute silence. Defense attorney sat with his mouth hanging open, his objections forgotten. The court reporter's hands hovered over her keyboard, shaking. Emma's face drained of every drop of color. Her vision swam as the implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. Her daughter, her baby girl, had witnessed the attack. Lily had seen everything. She'd watched someone assault her father, watched him fall, watched the chaos that followed. And in her 3-year-old mind, she'd somehow connected the police dog at the scene with finding the bad man who'd hurt Daddy. But there was something else in Lily's tone, something that made Emma's blood run cold. It wasn't just that Lily remembered seeing Rex searching for the attacker. There was something more specific, something that suggested Lily hadn't just seen the dog, she'd seen something else. Someone else. Detective Monroe rose slowly to his feet, his mind racing through the case file he'd reviewed hundreds of times. The assault on David had haunted him for 6 months. They'd found so little evidence. A torn piece of fabric caught on a fence, some disturbed ground where the attacker had fled, and footprints that led to a parking area before disappearing. Rex had tracked a scent for about 100 yards before losing it near the street where dozens of cars had been parked. But what if there was more? What if this child had seen something, someone, that could crack the case wide open? "Your Honor," Monroe said, his voice tight with controlled excitement and professional discipline, "I request permission to have this child interviewed by a specialist trained in working with young witnesses. What we're hearing here could be crucial testimony in an unsolved violent assault case." The prosecutor found her voice. "Your Honor, I strenuously object to the interruption of these proceedings. We have a defendant waiting for trial, witnesses scheduled, and—" "Ms." Judge Martinez cut her off, her voice like ice. "You are arguing about procedural timing while we may be witnessing the breakthrough in a serious violent crime. A man was beaten unconscious and nearly killed 6 months ago, and the perpetrator has been walking free ever since. If there's even a chance that this child saw something that could lead to justice, then your robbery case can wait." Closed her mouth and sat down, her face flushed with embarrassment. Judge Martinez turned to her bailiff. "Officer, I need you to contact Dr. Sarah Williams immediately. She's a child psychologist who works with the court system on sensitive witness cases. I want her here within the hour." "Yes, Your Honor." The bailiff pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway to make the call. The judge then addressed the entire courtroom. "I am declaring a recess in the current case. Everyone except Mrs., her daughter Lily, Detective Monroe, and essential court personnel will clear this courtroom immediately." There was a moment of stunned silence, and then movement, spectators gathering their belongings, attorneys protesting weakly, the defendant being led back to holding. Within 5 minutes, the crowded courtroom had emptied to just a handful of people. Emma sat holding Lily, who had finally exhausted herself and was lying limply against her mother's shoulder. The little girl's eyes were still open, still occasionally glancing toward Rex, but the fear had been replaced by a kind of resigned sadness that broke Emma's heart. "What happens now?" Emma asked, her voice small and frightened. Judge Martinez came down from the bench, her robe swishing as she approached. She sat down on the bench beside Emma, a gesture of humanity that transcended her judicial authority. "Now," she said gently, "we find out what your daughter knows. And then, Mrs., we catch the person who hurt your family." Dr. Sarah Williams arrived at the courthouse 43 minutes after Judge Martinez's urgent call. She swept through the heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B carrying a worn leather bag filled with toys, coloring books, and therapeutic tools she'd accumulated over 15 years of working with traumatized children. At 52 years old, with kind brown eyes and silver-streaked auburn hair pulled into a loose bun, Dr. Williams had interviewed countless child witnesses, victims of abuse, survivors of accidents, children who'd witnessed domestic violence. But she'd never been summoned to a courtroom mid-trial to interview a 3-year-old who might hold the key to solving a violent assault. Judge Martinez had converted the small conference room adjacent to her chambers into a makeshift interview space. The fluorescent lights had been dimmed and replaced with warmer lamp lighting. Someone had brought in pillows from the judge's personal office and spread them on the floor. A small table with child-sized chairs had been borrowed from the courthouse center. It looked less like a legal proceeding and more like a preschool classroom, which was exactly the point. Emma sat in a corner chair, her hands twisted together in her lap, watching as Dr. Williams set up her materials. Lily was curled against her mother's side, exhausted from crying but still awake, her thumb in her mouth, a habit Emma thought she'd broken months ago. Detective Monroe stood near the door with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Rex waited outside in the hallway with Officer, the bailiff who'd volunteered to watch the K-9 so Monroe could observe the interview. "Mrs. Dr. Williams said warmly, extending her hand, "I'm Sarah Williams. I specialize in forensic interviews with children. Judge Martinez has briefed me on the situation, and I want you to know that my primary concern is Lily's. We'll move at her pace, and if at any point this becomes too traumatic, we'll stop immediately." Emma shook the psychologist's hand weakly. Will it hurt her more, making her remember? Dr. Williams settled into one of the small chairs, bringing herself down to a less intimidating height. Children process trauma differently than adults. Sometimes talking about scary experiences in a safe environment actually helps them process and heal. But I promise you, I won't push her beyond what she's ready to share. She turned her attention to Lily, who was peeking at her from behind Emma's arm. "Hi, Lily. I'm Dr. Sarah, but you can just call me Sarah if that's easier. I heard you had a scary day, and I thought maybe we could talk about it while we do some coloring. Do you like to color?" Lily nodded slightly, her thumb still firmly planted in her mouth. Dr. Williams pulled out a large pad of paper and a box of crayons, spreading them on the small table. "Why don't you come sit with me? Your mama can sit right here where you can see her the whole time. She's not going anywhere, I promise." After a long moment of hesitation, Lily slowly climbed down from Emma's lap and approached the table. She selected a purple crayon, her favorite color, and began making tentative marks on the paper. Dr. Williams picked up a green crayon and started drawing alongside her, creating a simple scene of grass and sky. "You know what, Lily? I love dogs. Do you like dogs?" Lily's hand paused mid-scribble. She glanced toward the door as if checking whether Rex might suddenly appear. "Sometimes," she whispered. "Sometimes," Dr. Williams repeated, validating the response without judgment. "That makes sense. Some dogs are nice and some dogs might seem scary. Is that right?" "The police doggy is scary." "The police doggy outside, Rex." Lily nodded, pressing the purple crayon harder against the paper. "Can you tell me why Rex seems scary to you?" Lily's small face scrunched up, struggling to articulate complex feelings with her limited vocabulary. "He was there when Daddy got hurt, when the bad man came." Dr. Williams continued drawing, keeping her voice casual and non-threatening. "That must have been really scary, seeing Daddy get hurt. Can you tell me about that day? What were you doing before Daddy got hurt?" "Playing in the sandbox, making castles." Lily's voice was barely audible. "That sounds fun. I like making too. And where was your daddy?" "Running. He goes running, around and around the park." Lily's small hand traced a circle in the air. "And your mama?" "On her phone." There was no accusation in Lily's voice, just a simple statement of fact, but Emma flinched as if she'd been struck. The guilt she'd been carrying for 6 months intensified into physical pain in her chest. Dr. Williams noticed but continued smoothly. "So you were playing in the sandbox, Daddy was running and Mama was nearby. Then what happened, sweetie?" Lily's crayon movements became more agitated, scribbling harder and faster. "I saw Daddy. He was running past the big tree, the one with the swing, and then the bad man came." Detective Monroe shifted his weight, leaning forward slightly, every muscle tense with concentration. This was more detail than they'd ever had about the assault. "The bad man," Dr. Williams repeated gently. "What did the bad man do?" "He was hiding behind the tree, and when Daddy ran past, he Lily's voice cracked, tears welling up in her eyes. He hit Daddy with something big and hard, and Daddy fell down. He fell down and didn't get up. Emma covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to rush to her daughter, to scoop her up and end this painful recounting, but Dr. Williams had warned her to stay back unless Lily asked for her. The best thing Emma could do was stay quiet and let her daughter speak. "That must have been so scary, Lily. You're being really brave telling me about this. What happened after Daddy fell down?" "The bad man took Daddy's watch and his wallet. I saw him take it from Daddy's pocket, then he ran away, really fast. I tried to yell but no sound came out. I was too scared." Fresh tears rolled down Lily's round cheeks, and she wiped them away with the back of her hand, smearing purple crayon across her face. "Did you see which way the bad man ran?" Lily nodded and pointed toward the wall as if recreating the geography of the park. "Toward the parking lot, where all the cars are. He was limping like this." She got up from her chair and demonstrated an uneven gait, dragging her left leg slightly. Detective Monroe's eyes widened. A limp. That was new information, crucial identifying information that had never been in any report. He pulled out his phone and quickly typed a note to himself. "Suspect walks with noticeable limp, favors left leg." "Lily, you're doing such a good job," Dr. Williams praised. "Now I need to ask you about the police doggy, about Rex. When did you see him?" "After," Lily said, returning to her seat and picking up a black crayon. She began drawing dark, heavy strokes across her paper. "Mama came running. She was crying. Lots of people came. And the loud cars with the flashy lights. The ambulance people put Daddy on a bed thing. And then the police came. And the doggy." "What was the police doggy doing?" "Sniffing, walking around with his nose down. He went to where the bad man ran. He followed the smell." Lily's description was remarkably accurate for a 3-year-old, showing how deeply the experience had been imprinted in her memory. "Did the doggy find the bad man?" Lily shook her head sadly. "No, the doggy lost the smell by the cars. I heard the policeman say so. He said the smell was gone." Dr. Williams glanced at Detective Monroe, who nodded confirmation. That's exactly what had happened. Rex had tracked the scent to the parking area, but with dozens of vehicles having come and gone, the trail had gone cold. They'd canvassed the area, interviewed potential witnesses, but found nothing concrete. The case had stalled and eventually been filed away with other unsolved assaults. "Lily, this next question is really important, okay? I need you to think really carefully. Did you see the bad man's face?" Lily bit her lip, thinking hard. "Not really. He had a hood like on a sweatshirt, it covered his face. But," she paused and something flickered in her expression, a memory surfacing from the depths. "But I saw his eyes, when he turned to run, just for a second, light eyes like the sky." "Blue eyes," Dr. Williams prompted gently. "Yeah, blue, and he had marks on his arm, the arm without the long sleeve. Red and blue marks, pictures on his skin." Monroe felt electricity shoot through his body. Tattoos. The suspect had visible tattoos on one arm and blue eyes. Combined with the limp and the physical description, they were building an actual profile of the attacker, something they'd never had before. "Lily, do you remember what kind of pictures were on his arm? Was it like a drawing of something?" Lily nodded enthusiastically, warming to the topic. "A snake. A big snake that went around and around his arm with red eyes. I remember 'cause snakes are scary, but I like them too. At the zoo, we saw snakes." The room fell completely silent. Emma had stopped crying and was staring at her daughter with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Judge Martinez, who'd been observing from the doorway, felt a chill run down her spine. And Detective Monroe was already pulling up his database on his phone, searching for known offenders in the Chicago area with distinctive snake tattoos, blue eyes, and physical impairments that might cause a limp. Dr. Williams continued the interview for another 20 minutes, extracting every detail Lily could remember: the approximate time of day, what the weather was like, what the attacker was wearing besides the black hoodie. The little girl had seen and retained far more than anyone had imagined possible. When the session finally ended, Lily climbed into her mother's lap and promptly fell asleep, exhausted by the emotional ordeal. Dr. Williams stood and stretched, looking at Judge Martinez and Detective Monroe with a grave expression. "That child is telling the truth," she said quietly. Every indication, her body language, the consistency of her story, the sensory details she included, points to genuine memory recall, not imagination or coaching. She witnessed her father's assault, and she's been carrying that trauma for 6 months. Judge Martinez nodded slowly. "Detective Monroe, what's your assessment?" Monroe looked up from his phone, and for the first time since entering the courtroom that morning, he was smiling. A grim, determined smile that spoke of justice delayed but not. "Your Honor," he said, his voice tight with controlled excitement, "I think I know who attacked David, and with your permission I'm going to bring him in." Detective James Monroe strode out of the conference room with purpose blazing in his eyes, his phone already pressed to his ear. Judge Martinez followed close behind, her judicial robes billowing as she moved with uncharacteristic speed. Emma remained in the conference room with Lily sleeping peacefully in her arms for the first time in months, the exhausted child finally finding rest after releasing the burden she'd carried for so long. "It's Monroe," the detective barked into his phone, speaking to his partner, Detective Maria, back at the precinct. "I need you to run a search immediately. Male suspect, late 20s to early 40s, blue eyes, distinctive snake tattoo on one arm, coiled design with red eyes. Subject has a noticeable limp, favors the left leg. Cross-reference with known offenders in the Chicago area, specifically anyone with priors for robbery or assault." He listened for a moment, his jaw tightening. "I know it sounds specific. Just trust me on this and run it. I'm heading back to the station now." He ended the call and turned to find Judge Martinez watching him intently. "Detective, I want to be clear about something," she said, her voice dropping to a tone that was both cautionary and supportive. "That child in there has been through hell. If you're going to pursue this investigation, you need to be absolutely certain. I won't have her testimony weaponized or her trauma exploited if this doesn't lead somewhere solid." "Your Honor, I understand your concern, but I've been working cases for 23 years. That little girl just gave us more actionable intelligence than we've had in 6 months of investigation. The details she provided, the limp, the tattoo, the blue eyes, these aren't common characteristics. Someone with that specific combination will be in the system." Monroe's voice carried absolute conviction. Judge Martinez studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Keep me informed. Every step. If this leads to an arrest, I want to know immediately." "You have my word, Your Honor." Monroe hurried down the courthouse steps, Rex trotting beside him, the German shepherd sensing his handler's urgent energy. They reached the unmarked police cruiser, and within seconds they were pulling out of the parking lot, lights flashing but sirens silent. Monroe's mind raced through the case files he'd memorized months ago, cross-referencing them with the new information Lily had provided. The drive to the precinct took 12 minutes through midday Chicago traffic. Monroe used every second to mentally catalog potential suspects. The tattoo was the key, distinctive body art like that was often documented in police databases, especially for anyone with prior arrests. The limp narrowed it further. Someone who'd been injured recently, or had an old injury that never healed properly. He burst through the precinct doors and headed straight for the detective's bullpen, a cramped space filled with gray metal desks, outdated computers, and the perpetual smell of burnt coffee. Detective Maria looked up from her computer screen, her dark eyes bright with excitement. "Monroe, you're not going to believe this," she said, spinning her monitor to face him. "I found 3 potential matches in the database, but one of them," she clicked the mouse and filled the screen. "One of them is perfect." Monroe leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat. The face staring back at him from the monitor belonged to a man in his mid-30s with shoulder-length dark hair, a scraggly beard, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. The booking information listed his name as age 34, with a criminal record that painted a disturbing picture. Was arrested 2 years ago for assault and battery, continued, scrolling through the file. He got into a bar fight, nearly killed a guy. Served 18 months, got out on parole 14 months ago. And look at this. She clicked to another screen showing detailed arrest photos. There's your snake tattoo. The image showed his left forearm, where an intricate tattoo of a coiled serpent wrapped around his arm from wrist to elbow. The snake's scales were rendered in black and gray, but its eyes were done in bright red ink, giving the reptile a malevolent, hypnotic appearance. It was exactly as Lily had described. "What about the limp?" Monroe asked, though he already suspected the answer. Pulled up another document. During that bar fight 2 years ago, the victim fought back, shattered his left kneecap with a pool cue. He had surgery, but according to the medical records, he never completed physical therapy. Doctors' notes indicate he would have permanent mobility issues. Specifically, she highlighted a section of text, a noticeable limp favoring the left leg. Monroe felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with cracking a case. Every piece fit, but he needed more than circumstantial evidence and a child's testimony, no matter how compelling. He needed to place at the scene. Where does he live? Was already pulling up the address. According to his parole records, he's registered at an apartment on South Street, about, she calculated quickly, about 2 miles from Lincoln Park. 2 miles, walking distance for someone desperate and looking for targets. Monroe's mind constructed the scenario. Unemployed and struggling on parole, spots a lone jogger in Lincoln Park. An easy mark. He attacks from behind, steals the wallet and watch, flees on foot back to his neighborhood. It made perfect sense. What's his employment status? Currently unemployed. His parole officer's notes indicate he's been missing mandatory check-ins. Last one was, scrolled down, 3 weeks ago. He's technically in violation of parole right now. That was their opening. They had legal grounds to bring him in for questioning based on the parole violation alone. And once they had him in an interrogation room, Monroe could work on getting the truth about David's assault. Pull everything on him, Monroe ordered. Known associates, family members, bank records if you can get them, phone records. I want to know everywhere when in the week before and after the assault. And get me a current photo. Something more recent than that 2-year-old if possible. His fingers flew across the keyboard. On it, you want me to coordinate with the parole office? Yes, and get a warrant for his apartment. Judge Martinez will approve it. I'll call her personally. We're going to pick this guy up tonight. Over the next 4 hours, Monroe and his team built their case with meticulous precision. They pulled security footage from businesses near Lincoln Park on the day of the assault, looking for any sign of in the area. They contacted his parole officer, who confirmed that had been increasingly erratic and non-compliant. They obtained his phone records and discovered that his cell phone had pinged off a tower adjacent to Lincoln Park at 2:27 p.m. on April 18th. Just 3 minutes before the 911 call reporting David's assault came in. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was building momentum. Then found something that made the entire case crystallize. Monroe, look at this. She pulled up his financial records. On April 19th, the day after the assault, made a cash deposit of $340 at a check cashing place on South. Then he bought a cheap watch at a pawn shop for $25. Monroe's eyes narrowed. David's stolen wallet had contained $340 in cash. Emma had mentioned that specific amount because David had just cashed his paycheck. And his stolen watch had been a relatively inexpensive running watch, something a desperate thief might quickly replace to avoid suspicion. That's him, Monroe said quietly but with absolute certainty. That's our guy. He called Judge Martinez, who was still at the courthouse. She listened to his rapid-fire recitation of evidence, asked several pointed questions, and then made her decision. "I'm issuing the warrant. Bring him in, detective. But Monroe," her voice took on that cautionary tone again, "you need to be prepared for the possibility that he might not confess. A 3-year-old's testimony, even with all this circumstantial evidence, is going to be challenged in court. You need a confession or physical evidence that definitively ties him to the assault." "I understand, Your Honor, but I've got a good feeling about this one. When we bring in and he realizes how much we know, I think he'll crack." Monroe assembled a tactical team, 4 officers plus himself, and they geared up in the precinct's ready room, checking weapons and radios. Rex stayed by Monroe's side, the dog sensing that they were about to go into action. The German shepherd's tail wagged with anticipation, his training kicking in. At 6:47 p.m., just as the October sun was setting over Chicago, 3 unmarked vehicles and 1 K-9 unit pulled up outside a rundown apartment building on South Street. The building was a 4-story walk-up with peeling paint and broken windows, the kind of place where people minded their own business and didn't ask questions. Monroe checked his weapon and gave his team a final briefing. "Is in apartment 3C, he's got a history of violence, so stay sharp. You and Stevens take the back exit, and Martinez cover the front. I'm going up with Officer and Rex." The team moved into position with practiced efficiency. Monroe climbed the narrow, graffiti-covered stairwell, his boots echoing on the concrete steps. The hallway on the 3rd floor smelled of marijuana, fried food, and desperation. He reached apartment 3C and positioned himself to the side of the door, weapon drawn but pointed down. He knocked hard. Chicago police opened the door. "Silence." He knocked again, louder. "We have a warrant. Open up or we're coming in." From inside the apartment, Monroe heard the sound of rapid footsteps, something heavy being knocked over, and then the unmistakable sound of a window sliding open. "He's running," Monroe shouted into his radio. "Back exit now." Officer used the battering ram they'd brought, and the flimsy apartment door splintered on the second hit. Monroe burst inside, Rex lunging forward with him. The apartment was a disaster. Empty beer bottles, fast food containers, dirty clothes everywhere. The back window stood wide open, curtains billowing in the evening breeze. But they were too late. Was gone, disappeared into the Chicago night. And now, instead of a simple arrest, they had a fugitive on the run, a violent man who knew the police were closing in. The hunt had just become much more dangerous. Detective Monroe stood in his ransacked apartment, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The open window mocked him, its tattered curtains dancing in the cold October breeze. He'd been so close, mere seconds from apprehending a violent fugitive who'd been walking free for 6 months. Now was out there somewhere in the sprawling city, desperate and dangerous, knowing the walls were closing in. "Damn it!" Monroe slammed his fist against the wall, causing flakes of old paint to drift to the stained carpet. Rex whined softly beside him, sensing his handler's frustration. Monroe took a deep breath, forcing himself to think tactically rather than emotionally. Getting angry wouldn't catch. Smart police work would. Detective appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath from running up 3 flights of stairs. "Back exit was clear when we got there. He must have hit the fire escape and dropped into the alley. We've got units canvassing a 6-block radius, but..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. In a neighborhood like this, someone could disappear into a dozen different hiding spots within minutes. Monroe surveyed the apartment with a trained eye. Despite the general squalor, certain details told a story. Empty liquor bottles clustered around a stained armchair, a man drinking alone, heavily. Overdue bills scattered across a coffee table stained with cigarette burns. A cell phone charger plugged into the wall but no phone. Had grabbed it before running. "He took his phone," Monroe noted. "That means we can track him if he's stupid enough to turn it on." "Already on it," confirmed. her own phone pressed to her ear. "I've got Tech Crimes putting a trace on his number. The second it pings a tower, we'll know." Monroe moved deeper into the apartment, Rex following close behind. The kitchen was a disaster of unwashed dishes and empty takeout containers, but the bedroom was where things got interesting. The mattress had been shoved aside, revealing a hiding spot in the floor where several boards had been loose. Whatever had been hidden there was gone now, had clearly grabbed it during his escape. "Check this out," Monroe called, joined him, photographing the hiding spot with her phone. He kept something here, something important enough to grab while running from police. Cash drugs, speculated. Or evidence, maybe he kept trophies from his victims. Monroe's stomach turned at the thought. If it attacked David, there was a good chance he'd attacked others. They might be looking at a serial offender. Officer entered the bedroom holding an evidence bag. Detective found this in the bathroom trash. Inside the bag was a torn piece of denim fabric with distinctive red stitching, matching the description from the original crime scene report. The fabric that Rex had helped locate near the fence at Lincoln Park. They'd never been able to match it to a suspect until now. Monroe felt a surge of vindication. Bag it and tag it. We need that fabric tested against the original evidence immediately. If it's a match, we can definitively place at the scene. He continued his search, opening the small closet. Pushed to the back underneath a pile of dirty laundry was a black hoodie. Monroe carefully pulled it out, examining it under the apartment's dim light. Dark stains marked the right sleeve, stains that could be blood. His pulse quickened. "Get the evidence tech up here now. I want this hoodie tested for blood and DNA. If this has David's blood on it, we've got him." While made the call, Monroe knelt beside Rex. "Good boy," he said, stroking the dog's head. "You were there that day. You tried to catch him. Let's finish what we started." He pulled out an evidence bag containing a piece of fabric from his closet. Rex track. The German shepherd's demeanor changed instantly. His nose went to work, sniffing the fabric intensely, processing the scent information. Monroe led him out of the apartment and down to the street level. Rex immediately began working, nose to the ground, pulling toward the alley behind the building. The alley was narrow and dark, lit only by a single flickering streetlight. Dumpsters lined one side, overflowing with trash. Rex moved confidently, following a scent trail invisible to human senses. Monroe followed, flashlight in one hand, radio in the other, calling in their position to the units searching the area. The dog led them 3 blocks south, weaving through alleys and side streets before stopping at a chain-link fence surrounding an abandoned warehouse. Rex barked twice, his alert signal. Had come this way, possibly scaling the fence to hide inside the warehouse. Monroe radioed for backup, and within minutes, 4 patrol cars converged on the location. The warehouse was a massive structure, 5 stories of broken windows and rusted metal, the kind of place that attracted squatters, drug dealers, and anyone else wanting to disappear from society. "Surround the building," Monroe ordered. "No one gets out. You and take the west entrance, and Martinez east side. I'm going in the front with Rex." The tactical approach took 15 minutes to set up properly. Monroe wasn't going to rush this and risk officer safety or let slip away again. When everyone was in position, he activated his radio. "This is Detective Monroe. We're moving in. Stay alert, suspect is violent and possibly armed." The warehouse's front entrance was a massive rolling door, partially open and rusted in place. Monroe clicked on his tactical flashlight, mounted to his weapon, and stepped inside. The beam cut through darkness thick with dust and decay. The smell hit him immediately: mold, rot, urine, and the distinctive chemical scent of methamphetamine production. This warehouse was clearly being used as a drug lab. Rex moved ahead, alert but controlled, his training taking over. Monroe followed, checking corners and shadows, every sense heightened. The ground floor was a maze of old machinery, collapsed shelving, and debris, perfect hiding spots everywhere. Then Rex froze, his body going rigid. Monroe recognized the stance immediately. The dog had detected something, or someone. Monroe's voice echoed through the cavernous space. "Chicago police, there's no way out. Come out with your hands visible and we can end this peacefully." Silence. Then from somewhere above them, the sound of footsteps on metal, someone running up a staircase. "Suspect is moving to upper floors," Monroe shouted into his radio. "All units converge." He and Rex raced toward the sound, finding a rusted metal staircase that groaned ominously under Monroe's weight. They climbed rapidly, Rex taking the stairs 2 at a time. Second floor, third floor, the footsteps always staying just ahead of them. On the fourth floor, the staircase ended. Monroe emerged into a large open space that had once been an assembly floor. Moonlight streamed through broken windows, casting eerie shadows across the floor. And there, silhouetted against a shattered window on the far side of the room, stood. Even in the dim light, Monroe could see the details Lily had described. The distinctive tattoo visible on his left arm, the uneven stance suggesting the damaged left knee. His face was haggard, unshaven, with wild blue eyes that darted around looking for escape routes that didn't exist. "It's over," Monroe said, his weapon trained on the fugitive but his voice surprisingly calm. "The building is surrounded. There's nowhere to run." Laughed a harsh, bitter sound. "You don't understand. You can't understand what it's like being broke, desperate, watching everyone else have everything while you've got nothing. So you decided to take from others, to hurt innocent people." Monroe took a step closer, Rex pressed against his leg, ready to respond to any command. That jogger, he had expensive shoes, a nice watch, probably a wallet full of money. "Easy target. I didn't mean to hit him so hard, I panicked." His voice cracked. "Is he dead? Did I kill him?" Monroe's heart pounded. This was a confession, unprompted and clear. He needed to keep talking, get every detail on record. His body camera was capturing everything. "David survived. He has a wife and a 3-year-old daughter who witnessed what you did. That little girl has been having nightmares for 6 months because of you." His face crumpled. "A kid? There was a kid there." He seemed genuinely shocked, as if he hadn't considered that his actions might have witnesses, might have caused trauma beyond the immediate victim. "She saw everything, the black hoodie, the snake tattoo, the way you limp when you run. She gave us the description that led us straight to you. A 3-year-old child was braver than you've been in your entire life." Something broke in then. His shoulders sagged and he slumped against the wall, sliding down to sit on the dirty floor. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to turn myself in so many times, but I was too scared, too much of a coward." And 2 patrol officers emerged from the opposite stairwell, weapons drawn. They quickly surrounded, who offered no resistance as they handcuffed him and read him his rights. As they led toward the stairs, Monroe felt a complex mix of emotions: satisfaction at solving the case, anger at the senseless violence, and sadness at how one moment of desperation had destroyed multiple lives. He pulled out his phone and called Judge Martinez. She answered on the first ring. "Your Honor, we have him, is in custody and he confessed. It's over." He could hear the relief in her voice. "Good work, detective. Now comes the hard part, making sure justice is properly served." Monroe looked at being escorted away, then down at Rex, who sat patiently awaiting his next command. "Justice is already in motion, Your Honor. Thanks to the bravest witness I've ever worked with, a 3-year-old girl who refused to let a bad man disappear." Interrogation room at the Chicago Police Department's Central District was deliberately austere. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting that hummed with a headache-inducing frequency, a metal table bolted to the floor, and 3 uncomfortable chairs. Sat in one of those chairs, his wrists cuffed and secured to a metal ring on the table. His snake tattoo seemed to writhe in the harsh light, the red eyes appearing almost luminescent against his pale skin. Detective Monroe sat across from him, a manila folder thick with evidence spread before him. Detective stood near the door, arms crossed, watching with the intensity of a predator observing prey. The wall-mounted camera captured every angle of the room, recording everything for the prosecution team that would eventually take this case to trial. It was 11:47 p.m., nearly 5 hours since arrest. He'd been processed, photographed, fingerprinted, and given the opportunity to call a public defender. The attorney, an exhausted-looking woman named Jennifer, sat beside, her briefcase open and her legal pad covered in hastily scrawled notes. "Mr. Monroe began, his voice professional and measured. "You've been read your Miranda rights, and you've waived your right to remain silent. You've also made statements at the scene of your arrest that were captured on body camera footage. I want to give you the opportunity to tell your side of the story. From the beginning." Stared at the table, his jaw working as if chewing words he couldn't quite spit out. His blue eyes, the same eyes that Lily had described with frightened precision, were bloodshot and haunted. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't plan it. I want you to know that. I'm not some kind of monster who goes around hurting people for fun." "Then tell me what you are," Monroe prompted, his tone neither sympathetic nor accusatory. Just factual. Getting a confession was about creating space for truth, not forcing it. Took a shaky breath. "I'm a screw-up, a failure. I got out of prison 14 months ago determined to turn my life around. But nobody wants to hire an ex-con with an assault record and a bum knee. I applied to 53 jobs, I kept count and got rejected by every single one. My parole officer kept telling me to stay positive, but you can't eat positive thinking. You can't pay rent with good intentions." Jennifer touched his arm gently. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "I'm tired of running, I'm tired of lying, I'm tired of seeing that jogger's face every time I close my eyes." He looked directly at Monroe. "His name was David, right? The man I hurt." Monroe nodded. David, 34 years old, father of a 3-year-old daughter named Lily, husband to Emma. He was training for a marathon when you attacked him. Flinched as if physically struck. A marathon, Jesus. I remember thinking he looked healthy, fit, everything I used to be before I ruined my life. He gestured to his left leg. "I used to run track in high school, could do a mile in under 5 minutes. Now I can barely walk without pain." "Tell me about April 18th, Monroe said. "What happened that day?" His hands trembled, the cuffs rattling against the metal ring. "I'd been wandering around Lincoln Park for hours. I was hungry, hadn't eaten in 2 days because I'd spent my last $20 on beer. Pathetic, right? Chose alcohol over food. That's the kind of decisions I make." He paused, collecting himself, pulled out a chair and sat down, her posture slightly less aggressive. Sometimes a confession needed patience, needed the suspect to feel heard rather than judged. "I was sitting on a bench near the playground watching families. Parents pushing kids on swings, couples having picnics. Everyone looked so damn happy, so secure. And I felt like a ghost, like I didn't exist in their world anymore. Like prison had erased me from normal life." "What time was this?" asked. "Around 2, maybe 2:15. I watched this jogger, David, run past me. 3 times he circled the park, and each time I noticed more details. Expensive running shoes, Apple Watch, the kind of athletic gear that costs what I used to make in a week. And I thought if I just had a little money I could eat, get enough cash together to make rent, not get evicted." Monroe leaned forward slightly. "So you decided to rob him?" "I decided to survive," corrected, then shook his head. "No, that's bullshit. I decided to be a coward and a thief. I saw an opportunity and I took it." His voice hardened with self-loathing. "I walked to that big oak tree near the trail, the one with the tire swing. I knew he'd come around again. I pulled my hood up, found a broken tree branch about 3 feet long, solid wood, and I waited." The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Monroe could see retreating into the memory, reliving the moment that had destroyed 2 lives. He came around the bend, running at a good pace, earbuds in, completely focused on his workout. He never saw me. I stepped out from behind the tree and his voice cracked. I swung that branch as hard as I could, connected with the back of his head. He went down like someone cut his strings, just collapsed. "Did he say anything? Did he see your face?" Monroe asked. "No, he was unconscious before he hit the ground. I panicked then. I thought I might have killed him, but I'd already committed, already crossed that line. So I went through his pockets fast, found his wallet, grabbed his watch. His wallet had $340 in it, cash. And his watch wasn't as expensive as I thought, maybe $50 retail, but I took it anyway." "What about the fabric we found at the scene?" interjected. "The torn denim with red stitching." Glanced down at his legs, currently clad in gray sweatpants the jail had provided. "My jeans caught on the chain-link fence when I ran. I heard them rip but didn't stop to check. I just ran as fast as my bad knee would let me. Limped, really. Made it to the parking lot, then slowed down, tried to blend in with regular people walking around." Monroe pulled a photograph from his folder, a crime scene photo showing David unconscious on the ground, blood matting his hair. He slid it across the table. "Look at what you did." Looked and his face went gray, tears welled in his eyes. Did he recover?" "He was in a coma for 2 weeks, severe traumatic brain injury. He has permanent neurological damage, chronic headaches, memory problems, dizzy spells. He can't run anymore, can't do his job the same way. His entire life was altered because you were hungry and made bad choices." "And the little girl," added, her voice sharp. "Lily. She was playing in the sandbox 50 feet away. She saw everything." His composure shattered completely. He bent forward as much as his restraints allowed, sobbing into his cuffed hands. "God, no, not a kid. Please tell me the kid didn't see." "She saw you attack her father, saw you rob him, watched him lying unconscious on the ground while you ran away. She's been having nightmares for 6 months, waking up screaming, terrified of German shepherds because my K-9 partner was at the scene that day searching for you." Monroe's voice grew harder. "That 3-year-old child carried your crime in her mind for half a year, and she was brave enough to speak up when she saw Rex again. She pointed at him and said, 'Bad man,' and that's what cracked this case wide open." Was openly weeping now, his whole body shaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I wanted to turn myself in so many times. I'd walk past police stations and stand outside for hours trying to work up the courage, but I was too scared, too weak." Jennifer looked at Monroe and with professional resignation. "Detectives, my client is clearly remorseful. He's cooperating fully. I'd like to discuss the possibility of a plea agreement." "That's up to the state's attorney," Monroe interrupted. "But here's what happens next. We have your confession on record. We have body camera footage from your arrest where you admitted to the assault. We have physical evidence linking you to the scene, the torn fabric, the hoodie with what I'm betting is David's blood on it. We have financial records showing you deposited exactly the amount stolen from his wallet the day after the attack. And we have eyewitness testimony from a 3-year-old girl who described you so accurately it led us straight to your door." He stood, gathering his folder. "You're being formally charged with aggravated assault, armed robbery, and fleeing police custody. You'll be held without bail given your flight risk. The prosecutor's office will be in touch regarding potential plea arrangements, but I can tell you right now, you're looking at serious prison time." Nodded, seeming almost relieved that the running was over. Can I send a message to David, to his family?" Monroe paused at the door. "That's not my call, but if I were you, I'd write down everything you just told us, every detail, every feeling, and I'd give it to your attorney to pass along. It won't undo what you did, but it might help them understand you're not just a monster. You're a human being who made monstrous choices." As Monroe and left the interrogation room, let out a long breath. "Think he'll plead out?" "Definitely. He knows we have him dead to rights. He'll take a plea to avoid trial, probably accept 15 to 20 years rather than risk life in prison. Monroe pulled out his phone. I need to call Emma. Let her know we got justice for her family. The call lasted 10 minutes. Emma cried tears of relief, anger, sadness, and something like closure. She asked if Lily would have to testify in court, and Monroe assured her that with confession, her daughter would likely be spared that trauma. When he hung up, Monroe looked at, "You know what the crazy thing is? If that little girl hadn't recognized Rex, if she hadn't been brave enough to speak up, would still be out there. The case was cold. We had nothing." Nodded. Sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. Yeah, Monroe agreed, thinking of a 3-year-old in a purple butterfly dress, pointing at a police dog with tears streaming down her face. Sometimes it does. 3 months had passed since that extraordinary Tuesday morning in Courtroom 4B. The Chicago winter had arrived with its characteristic brutality. Snow piling high on sidewalks, wind cutting through even the warmest coats, and gray skis that seemed to press down on the city like a heavy blanket. But inside that same courtroom on a frigid January morning, there was an unmistakable warmth generated by the crowd that had gathered for sentencing hearing. Judge Martinez entered through her chamber's door at precisely 9:00 a.m., her black robes freshly pressed, her silver hair impeccably styled. But today, her typically stern expression had softened into something more reflective, almost gentle. This wasn't just another case being closed. This was a story of trauma, courage, and redemption that had touched everyone involved. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Media representatives lined the back wall, cameras ready despite the prohibition on filming during proceedings. Every seat was filled with spectators who'd followed the case since news broke about the 3-year-old witness whose 2 words had solved a 6-month cold case. Local and national news outlets had dubbed Lily the little hero, a moniker that made Emma simultaneously proud and protective of her daughter's privacy. Emma sat in the front row, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Beside her sat David, looking healthier than he had in months, but still bearing the invisible scars of his assault. His hand found Emma's, and they held each other with the grip of 2 people who'd survived a storm together. Lily was not present. Emma and David had made the joint decision to shield her from the sentencing hearing. She was at home with Emma's mother, playing with toys and blissfully unaware that the bad man from her nightmares was about to face justice. On the other side of the courtroom sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled. His attorney, Jennifer, sat beside him with a thick folder of documents. Looked different than he had during his arrest, cleaner, sober, but somehow smaller, as if the weight of his crimes had physically diminished him. His snake tattoo was visible on his forearm, a permanent reminder of the details that had led to his capture. Detective James Monroe sat in the 3rd row with his partner, Detective. Rex wasn't present. Police dogs weren't typically allowed in courtroom proceedings. But Monroe had a photo of his K-9 partner tucked in his jacket pocket, a reminder of the unexpected hero who'd helped crack this case simply by being in the right place at the right time. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and the courtroom stood in unison as Judge Martinez took her seat at the bench. "Please be seated," she said, surveying the room with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. "We are here today for the sentencing of who has pleaded guilty to charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, armed robbery, and resisting arrest. Mister, please stand." Rose unsteadily, his shackles clanking. Jennifer stood beside him, her hand briefly touching his shoulder in a gesture of support. Judge Martinez opened the file before her, though everyone suspected she'd already memorized every word. "Mister, you have pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for the prosecution's recommendation of 20 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after serving 15 years. Before I render my decision on whether to accept this plea agreement, I want to hear from the victims. Mrs., would you like to make a statement?" Emma stood, her legs trembling. She'd written and rewritten her victim impact statement dozens of times, never quite capturing the full scope of how actions had devastated her family. She unfolded a piece of paper with shaking hands and began to read. Your Honor, on April 18th of last year, my husband left for what should have been a routine jog. He kissed me goodbye, waved to our daughter, and promised to be back in an hour. Instead, I received a phone call that changed our lives forever. Emma's voice cracked, but she pressed on. David spent 2 weeks in a coma. When he woke up, he couldn't remember our daughter's name. He couldn't remember our wedding anniversary. He had to relearn how to walk without stumbling, how to read without the words swimming on the page. She looked directly at who couldn't meet her eyes. But the person who suffered most wasn't David or me. It was our 3-year-old daughter, Lily. She witnessed your attack on her father, and she's carried that trauma every single day since. She had nightmares. She became afraid of strangers. She cried whenever we drove past Lincoln Park. For 6 months, we didn't understand why our happy, carefree little girl had become so anxious and frightened. Emma's voice strengthened with anger. You took my daughter's innocence. You took my husband's health. You took our sense of safety. And for what? $340 and a cheap watch. Was it worth it, mister? Was destroying our family worth a few $100s? Tears streamed down his face, but he remained silent. Emma took a deep breath. But here's what you didn't take. You didn't take our strength. You didn't take our love for each other. And you didn't take my daughter's courage. When Lily saw that police dog in court and recognized him from the worst day of her life, she didn't stay quiet. She spoke up. She pointed at Rex and said, "Bad man," and those 2 words set everything in motion that led to your arrest. A 3-year-old child was braver than you've been in your entire adult life. She folded her paper, her statement complete. I hope you spend every day of your prison sentence thinking about the little girl whose courage caught you, and I hope someday you become half as brave as she is. Emma sat down, and David wrapped his arm around her shoulders as she wept. Judge Martinez nodded solemnly. Thank you, Mr. Do you wish to speak? David stood, his movements still slightly uncoordinated, a permanent reminder of his traumatic brain injury. Your Honor, I'm a man of faith. I believe in forgiveness. But I also believe in consequences. What Mr. did to me was terrible, but what he did to my daughter, making her witness violence against her own father, that's something I struggle to forgive. He turned to face directly. I want you to know that Lily still asks about the bad man sometimes. She asks if he's going to come back and hurt me again. My wife and I have to reassure her over and over that she's safe, that I'm safe, that the bad man is gone. You didn't just hurt my body, you hurt my child's mind and spirit. David's voice grew stronger. But I also want you to know something else. I'm recovering. Every day I get a little better. I've started jogging again, short distances, but I'm doing it. And Lily is healing too. She's smiling more, laughing more, having fewer nightmares. You tried to break us, but we're stronger than you thought. We survived you. He sat back down, and the courtroom remained silent for a long moment. Judge Martinez turned her attention to, Mister, you have the right to make a statement before I impose sentence. Do you wish to speak? Nodded and stood, his voice hoarse with emotion. Your Honor, Mr. and Mrs., there's nothing I can say that will undo what I did. I know that. I made choices that destroyed lives, including my own. I was desperate, angry, and selfish. I saw an opportunity to solve my problems at someone else's expense, and I took it without thinking about the human cost. He wiped his eyes with his shackled hands. Learning that a child witnessed what I did, that's haunted me every night in jail. I can't sleep without seeing her face in my mind, imagining how scared she must have been. I'm so sorry. I know those words are inadequate, but they're all I have. Look directly at the. I hope someday you can forgive me, though I don't deserve it. And I hope your daughter, Lily, grows up strong and brave, and that she forgets about the bad man who hurt her daddy. She deserves to have a childhood free from the trauma I caused. He sat down, and Judge Martinez let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking. I've presided over thousands of cases in my career. I've seen the worst of humanity and occasionally glimpses of the best. Your case represents both, the worst in your actions and the best in a 3-year-old child's courage to speak truth. She leaned forward. The plea agreement before me recommends 20 years with possibility of parole after 15. However, I have the discretion to adjust this sentence based on the totality of circumstances. Mister, your crime was brutal and cowardly. You attacked an innocent man from behind, causing permanent neurological damage. You traumatized a child. You fled from justice. Judge Martinez paused. However, you also cooperated fully after your arrest. Your confession was complete and you've shown genuine remorse. These factors matter in the interest of justice. She picked up her gavel. It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 18 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections, with the possibility of parole after serving 13 years. You will also be required to pay full restitution to David for medical expenses, lost wages, and ongoing therapy costs. Additionally, you will be required to pay for Lily psychological counseling for as long as she needs it. The gavel came down with finality. Furthermore, I'm recommending that during your incarceration, you participate in educational and vocational programs to ensure that when and if you're released, you have legitimate means of supporting yourself. This court hopes that you use your time in prison to become the person you should have been before you made these terrible choices. Nodded, accepting his fate with visible relief that the uncertainty was over. As the bailiffs prepared to escort out, Judge Martinez made one final statement. I want everyone in this courtroom to remember something. Justice today happened because a 3-year-old girl found her voice at exactly the right moment. She saw something that frightened her, and instead of staying silent, she spoke up. Let that be a lesson to all of us. Truth can come from the most unexpected sources, and courage isn't measured by age or size. It's measured by the willingness to stand up and say, "This is wrong," even when you're scared. After was led away, the courtroom slowly emptied. Detective Monroe approached extending his hand to David. "How are you doing, mister?" David shook his hand firmly. "Better every day, detective. Thank you for never giving up on the case." "I should be thanking your daughter," Monroe said with a slight smile. "She did what 6 months of police work couldn't do. She identified the suspect and gave us the break we needed." Emma smiled through her tears. "Lily wants to meet Rex properly someday, when she's ready. She knows now that he's a good dog, that he was trying to help, not hurt." "Any time," Monroe promised. "Rex and I would be honored." As they left the courthouse, stepping out into the cold Chicago morning, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in 6 months' peace. The bad man was going to prison. Justice had been served. And most importantly, Lily could begin to truly heal, knowing that the monster from her nightmares couldn't hurt anyone anymore. That evening, Emma and David sat on either side of Lily on the living room couch, reading her favorite bedtime story. The little girl, wearing pajamas covered with butterflies, listened intently, occasionally asking questions or pointing at pictures. When the story ended, she looked up at her parents with those bright, intelligent eyes. "Mama, Daddy, I'm not scared anymore," she announced with the absolute certainty only a child possesses. "Why not, baby?" Emma asked, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "Because the bad man is gone, and the good doggy helped catch him. I'm a big girl now." She yawned and snuggled between her parents. David met Emma's eyes over their daughter's head, and in that moment they both understood that they'd survived the worst and come out stronger. Their family was healing. Justice had been served, and their brave little girl, their hero, was finally at peace. Outside, snow began to fall softly over Chicago, covering the city in a blanket of white. Inside the home, a family that had been broken was becoming whole again, one day at a time, one hug at a time, one bedtime story at a time. And in a small way, the world felt a little more just, a little more right, because a 3-year-old girl had found her voice when it mattered most.